What if the religious regime in Tehran is now trapped in a high-stakes war on two fronts that it physically cannot win? While the international media focuses almost entirely on the roaring jet engines and falling missiles in the sky, a far more dangerous fire is spreading through the rugged mountains of the West. Before we jump into this deep narrative, do me a quick favor right now. If you want hard-hitting stories that dig far beyond mainstream headlines, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with a friend who needs to see the bigger geopolitical picture. It takes just 2 seconds, and it helps us bring you the truth that others miss. For more than 40 years, the clerical establishment ruling Iran has maintained its grip on power through absolute force, total censorship, and relentless domestic surveillance. But deep within the jagged peaks of the Zagros region, millions of ethnic Kurds have endured decades of intense pressure, systemic neglect, and harsh political repression. For generations, these communities were forced to survive under the heavy boots of state security forces, watching their language banned in schools, their local economies deliberately starved, and their political activists imprisoned or executed. Yet, despite 4 decades of brutal crackdowns, the spirit of resistance never truly died in the western provinces. It simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for the right moment, the right spark, and the right alignment of historical forces to strike back at the heart of the regime. That moment arrived with shocking speed when several rival Kurdish political and military movements took an unprecedented leap forward. For decades, these individual organizations had fought their own isolated battles, separated by ideological differences, distinct personal histories, and deep-seated tactical disagreements. They operated on their own timelines, rarely sharing intelligence or coordinating military maneuvers against Tehran. But as economic chaos, massive popular protests, and intense external military pressure began to fracture the regime's foundation, the leaders of these opposing groups realized that standing divided was no longer an option. Gathering in secret meetings, they made a historic choice: to set aside decades of political rivalry and forge a unified command structure, forming a single consolidated coalition capable of challenging the Islamic Republic on a massive scale. This breakthrough was not a sudden impulse, but the culmination of months of rising anger and coordinated civil resistance across dozens of towns and cities. Across the western regions, general strikes had already brought daily commerce to a complete standstill, closing bazaars and leaving government offices empty. When these armed political parties officially joined forces, they did not issue a basic political manifesto or ask for minor policy reforms. Instead, they issued a direct and uncompromising ultimatum calling on regular Iranian soldiers, local police officers, and conscripted security forces to immediately abandon their posts, lay down their weapons, and stop defending a regime that was rapidly losing control over its own territory. At the exact same time, local defense committees began forming inside urban neighborhoods and rural villages, urging ordinary citizens to safeguard critical civil infrastructure and prepare for the potential collapse of central authority. This was a direct signal that the movement was no longer merely reacting to state violence, but actively preparing to govern liberated zones. For the mullahs in Tehran, this direct challenge represents a terrifying reality that keeps top generals up at night. The regime is not dealing with a disorganized crowd of peaceful demonstrators that can be easily dispersed with tear gas and riot squads. It is confronting a well-structured, highly motivated, and militarily capable coalition that understands how to fight both on the streets and across unforgiving mountain terrain. To grasp why this region poses such an existential threat to the central government, one must look closely at the geographical realities of the Zagros Mountains. This vast mountain range forms a wall of steep ridges, deep canyons, and hidden mountain passes, separating Iran from its western neighbors. For a conventional army relying on heavy armor, supply trucks, and centralized command hubs, this terrain is an absolute nightmare. Heavy tanks cannot easily maneuver along narrow, winding cliffside roads, and supply convoys become easy targets for agile light infantry. Conversely, for mobile, lightly equipped guerrilla fighters who have spent their entire lives traversing these hidden paths, the mountains act as a natural fortress. Furthermore, many of the veteran fighters within this unified front are far from inexperienced recruits. A significant portion of these combatants previously fought on the front lines against brutal extremist groups during major regional conflicts in Iraq and Syria, often operating alongside foreign military advisors and absorbing modern tactics. They understand how to move silently through hostile environments, utilize advanced communications, set up effective ambushes, and strike strategic targets without exposing themselves to superior enemy firepower. When you combine this level of practical battlefield experience with an intimate knowledge of the physical landscape, you create an asymmetric force that can frustrate a much larger regular army. Historically, central authorities in Tehran have always viewed the western borderlands with immense suspicion. Immediately after the 1979 revolution, when the new religious government sought to consolidate absolute power, Local populations in the west demanded regional autonomy and cultural rights. The regime responded not with diplomacy or dialogue, but with overwhelming military force, sending heavy armored divisions and attack helicopters to crush local uprisings. That brutal campaign established a painful cycle that defined state relations for the next 4 decades. Whenever public dissatisfaction flared up, the state deployed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to enforce curfews, carry out mass arrests, and lock down entire cities. However, this reliance on brute force created a dangerous paradox. By shutting down every legal avenue for political expression, suppressing local languages, and hanging dissidents in public squares, the state ensured that peaceful compromise became completely impossible. Generations of young people grew up seeing the central government not as a protective state, but as an occupying military force. Every violent crackdown did not eliminate the desire for freedom. It simply drove it deeper into the fabric of daily life, generating a deep pool of quiet resentment that was bound to burst open the moment the regime showed any sign of weakness. That vulnerability is now on full display as the regime finds itself completely overwhelmed by simultaneous internal and external crises. In major metropolitan centers across the country, vital public services are visibly deteriorating under the weight of severe economic isolation, structural corruption, and extreme environmental stress. Long power outages have crippled industrial centers, while acute water shortages have sparked angry demonstrations in agricultural regions that were once considered politically stable. At the same time, sustained foreign airstrikes have systematically targeted key military installations, radar sites, missile production facilities, and energy infrastructure across multiple provinces, leaving state air defenses heavily degraded and forcing military commanders to shift assets. This creates a classic military dilemma known as strategic overextension. A government cannot fight an intense air war, protect its vital national infrastructure, maintain internal security in major cities, and heavily garrison a hostile mountainous border region. Every battalion of Revolutionary Guards sent to reinforce the Western Mountains is a unit taken away from guarding delicate urban centers. Every missile and drone expended against remote mountain hideouts is a high-value weapon that cannot be used to defend airspace. The mullahs are discovering that their military apparatus, while imposing on paper, is being stretched so thin that dangerous tiers are appearing. If you are finding this breakdown valuable and want to help independent narrative content reach more viewers who appreciate deep geopolitical insight, take a quick second right now to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and forward this video to your group chats. Your engagement keeps our channel independent, active, and focused on delivering stories that matter. As the political and military pressure mounts on Tehran, the human cost along the borderlands continues to reach staggering levels. Over recent months, state military forces have launched hundreds of artillery barrages, ballistic missile strikes, and suicide drone attacks. These bombardment campaigns have not been limited to isolated military outposts. They have repeatedly struck dense forest areas and civilian settlements. Millions of dollars in structural damage have been inflicted on local communities, forcing thousands of peaceful villagers to abandon their ancestral homes. Thousands are forced to leave behind their livestock and seek refuge in temporary shelters. Even more concerning are serious allegations raised by local human rights monitors and frontline medical workers regarding the munitions used. Reports have emerged detailing unusual chemical burns, severe respiratory distress, and long-lasting fires that continue to reignite long after impact. Independent observers and international advocacy groups have drawn attention to the possible use of incendiary agents, such as white phosphorus. While official state media fiercely denies using unlawful weapons, the consistent medical reports from regional clinics paint a terrifying picture. The extreme measures the regime is willing to deploy to suppress its internal enemies are becoming increasingly visible to the world. The environmental devastation caused by these heavy bombardments has added yet another layer of tragedy to an already dire humanitarian situation. The Zagros region is famous for its ancient oak forests, fertile valleys, and vital water basins that sustain regional ecosystems. Shelling and drone strikes have ignited massive forest fires that have burned through thousands of hectares of wilderness. These fires are destroying ancient olive groves, burning rich agricultural soil, and killing vast amounts of local wildlife. In a region already suffering from severe drought and ecological stress, the destruction of these primary forests threatens to disrupt weather patterns. It threatens to degrade water tables and render vast swathes of land completely uninhabitable for generations to come. Behind every tactical map, troop movement, and military assessment lies the heavy, undeniable human cost borne by ordinary families. In towns like Sanandaj, Mahabad, and Sakez, daily life has become an exercise in constant anxiety and survival. Parents watch their young adult children face a heartbreaking dilemma: stay in economically devastated towns, where government surveillance is constant, or flee into the rugged mountains to join the unified resistance movement. Families live in continuous fear of middle-of-night raids. Local hospitals struggle to treat civilian casualties with severely depleted medical supplies due to tight border blockades and national economic sanctions. This deep human suffering is precisely what fuels the unrelenting determination of the resistance forces. When people feel they have lost everything, their livelihoods, their security, their basic rights, they reach a threshold where fear no longer works. The regime's heavy-handed tactics, intended to intimidate the population into submission, have instead eliminated any remaining hesitation among the youth. Every destroyed village, every burned forest, and every fallen protester serves as a powerful recruitment tool for the unified coalition. Personal grief is being transformed into a collective political movement aimed at ending decades of authoritarian rule. To fully comprehend why Tehran views this unified Western Front as an unmatched nightmare, one must examine the broader strategic landscape. The Islamic Republic's regional strategy has long depended on projecting power far beyond its own national borders through foreign proxy groups. For decades, state strategists argued that by fighting their battles in foreign lands, they could keep potential conflicts far away from Iranian soil. This foreign policy posture allowed the regime to project an image of regional dominance while keeping its domestic population distracted and subdued. However, that long-standing strategic doctrine has now completely inverted. The foreign proxy network has been severely weakened. With its external buffers crumbling, the regime is no longer able to keep the conflict outside its borders. The fight has arrived directly at its doorstep, forcing military commanders to confront well-organized domestic opposition forces on Iranian soil. The very resources that were once funneled abroad to build foreign influence are now desperately needed at home just to maintain control. Furthermore, the regional implications of a sustained conflict in the Western Mountains extend far beyond Iran's immediate borders. Neighboring countries and regional authorities are watching the situation with intense anxiety, fully aware that a major escalation could spill over. Border communities in neighboring states have already suffered collateral damage from stray artillery shells and cross-border drone strikes. This leads to regional diplomatic friction and economic disruption. Foreign investment in regional infrastructure has slowed dramatically. International companies weigh the growing risks of operating near an active, unpredictable war zone as the conflict intensifies. The central government in Tehran finds itself trapped in a profound strategic dilemma of its own making. If it chooses to deploy primary military units to launch a massive offensive in the Western Mountains, it risks leaving the capital exposed. Vital nuclear facilities and major industrial centers would be dangerously exposed to external airstrikes and urban uprisings. On the other hand, if it relies merely on passive defense, it allows the unified Kurdish coalition to consolidate its power. The coalition can establish secure bases of operation and gradually expand its political authority over liberated towns and villages. This dilemma is further complicated by the internal state of the regime's own military apparatus and low morale. Regular conscript soldiers, drawn from diverse backgrounds, are showing increasing signs of exhaustion and ideological burnout. Many of these young soldiers have no desire to fight their own fellow citizens or conduct brutal counterinsurgency operations. They are asked to fight for a government that cannot even guarantee basic economic stability or electricity for their families. Reports of desertions, draft evasion, and passive resistance within lower military ranks are becoming increasingly common. This forces the regime to rely almost exclusively on its most fanatical, highly paid security units for internal control. Yet, relying solely on specialized security forces creates its own set of critical vulnerabilities that can be exploited. These elite units, while highly loyal and heavily armed, are limited in number and cannot be present everywhere at once. If simultaneous rebellions break out in multiple provinces, the regime's elite forces will be stretched far beyond their physical capacity. Rebellions in Baluchistan, Arab-majority areas, and the Kurdish provinces would create an impossible situation for state forces. The state security apparatus is structured to crush isolated, localized unrest. It is fundamentally unprepared for a multi-regional uprising. Backed by experienced armed movements operating along difficult borderlands, the opposition presents a challenge the state cannot match. If you appreciate this level of detailed analysis and want to ensure you never miss our upcoming investigative breakdowns, hit subscribe. Turn on all notifications, like this video, and share it across your social media platforms to support independent geopolitical insight. Your continuous support is what allows us to keep analyzing complex geopolitical movements in simple, clear, and powerful language. The psychological impact of this unified resistance on the broader Iranian public cannot be overstated in its significance. For decades, state propaganda has worked tirelessly to convince the general population that the regime is an unshakable, permanent institution. The state claimed that any attempt at organized resistance was entirely futile and would only lead to national collapse. By carefully controlling television networks and radio stations, the government successfully cultivated a sense of learned helplessness among citizens. However, The sight of 5 historically divided opposition parties coming together under a single banner has shattered that psychological barrier. Standing firm against state aggression and coordinating direct military actions has given people a new sense of hope. Across major cities, ordinary citizens are watching the Western Front with a growing sense of possibility for a different future. When people see that state security forces can be held at bay, the aura of regime invincibility evaporates rapidly. Military bases can be successfully challenged, and armed units can hold ground in the mountains against all odds. This shift in public perception is often the silent turning point in the lifespan of any authoritarian government. It transforms passive dissatisfaction into active popular defiance that can eventually topple even the most entrenched regimes. Digital technology and social media have played a crucial role in amplifying this psychological shift, despite total internet blackouts. Using satellite connections and encrypted messaging networks, videos and photographs from the western regions regularly leak out to the public. Images showing unified resistance fighters and destroyed state military equipment circulate rapidly among youth groups in major cities. Every verified report of state retreat or military setback undermines the official government narrative of absolute control. It proves to the urban population that the regime's control is far more fragile than state media admits or projects. This growing sense of regime vulnerability has also begun to influence internal dynamics within the ruling elite itself. Within the halls of power in Tehran, clear divisions are starting to emerge between different factions of the government. Hardline military commanders demand even harsher domestic repression, while pragmatic political figures fear it will accelerate the state's collapse. Senior clerics and bureaucrats are increasingly worried about their long-term survival and the loss of their immense privileges. This internal anxiety leads to distrust, finger-pointing, and paralysis within top decision-making bodies at a critical time. Decisive, clear leadership is most desperately required, yet it is conspicuously absent as the crisis deepens. History provides powerful lessons on how authoritarian regimes crumble when faced with this specific combination of structural pressures. Throughout the 20th century, numerous seemingly permanent autocracies appeared fully secure, right up until the moment they suddenly fractured. In almost every case, the final collapse was not caused by a single dramatic event, but by the cumulative weight of factors. Multiple structural pressures working together over time eventually reach a point where the system can no longer function. When a government loses its economic capacity to pay its security forces, its moral legitimacy in the eyes of its people vanishes. Without the physical ability to control its own borders, the state structure becomes an empty shell waiting for a final push. The current situation along Iran's western frontier mirrors these historical precedents in striking and undeniable ways. The unified Kurdish alliance does not need to march directly on the capital to bring about profound political change. Instead, by maintaining constant pressure and liberating rural territories, they create the conditions necessary for broader national change. The alliance acts as a permanent bleeding wound on the regime's side, draining its financial reserves and military hardware. It breaks the regime's psychological grip over the nation and provides a living example of successful resistance. Looking ahead into the coming months, several critical indicators will determine whether this marks the final chapter for the establishment. The first key factor to watch is the continuous durability and unity of the unified coalition itself against external pressure. Maintaining operational unity among groups with different ideological backgrounds is notoriously difficult under severe military pressure. If the coalition's leadership can maintain its solid front, its political leverage will grow exponentially over the coming year. The second critical indicator is the potential spread of organized resistance to other ethnic regions and industrial heartlands across Iran. If trade unions and energy sector workers coordinate their strikes with military pressure in the West, the state will collapse. A nationwide general strike would completely sever the regime's financial lifelines and render the central state functionally paralyzed. We must also examine how the regime's intelligence apparatus is struggling to cope with this new, decentralized reality. For decades, Iran's intelligence services were considered omnipresent, maintaining deep networks of informers in every town and university district. However, the creation of a multi-party coalition with decentralized command posts has severely compromised traditional surveillance methods. Signals intelligence and human intelligence networks are routinely fed false information, leaving state commanders blind to tactical movements. This intelligence vacuum has forced the state into a purely reactive posture, responding with heavy-handed sweeps after attacks occur. These indiscriminate security operations inevitably sweep up innocent civilians, further alienating communities that might otherwise have remained neutral. In city after city, the government's heavy-handed response is actively converting passive bystanders into active resistance sympathizers. What the mullahs intended as a show of absolute authority has instead exposed their tactical confusion and operational desperation. At the same time, the broader geopolitical landscape surrounding Iran is shifting in ways that make long-term survival unlikely. Major international economic partners are finding it increasingly difficult to conduct normal trade relations with a state losing control. Global shipping routes, regional trade agreements, and energy corridors are all disrupted by the ongoing instability near the borders. Foreign capitals begin to prepare for a potential post-regime reality, leaving the mullahs isolated and stripped of reliable allies. Finally, the international community's response will play a decisive role in shaping the ultimate outcome of this historic struggle. Whether foreign powers choose to provide direct humanitarian support or diplomatic recognition could prove to be the ultimate tipping point. What is happening today along the steep ridges of the Zagros Mountains is a profound shift in a 45-year struggle. The mullahs in Tehran are confronting their absolute worst nightmare, a brave, organized, and unified people standing their ground. As the pressure builds from above, within from the cities, and along the rugged border, the foundation is shaking. The coming months will inevitably reshape the geopolitical map of the Middle East and the future of the nation. No amount of military force can permanently suppress the human spirit's unyielding desire for liberation and fundamental dignity.